Alright, so here's mission 1 proper. Um, and I guess there's a lot to talk about here, the first of which is the fact that this mission is just way too long. We were never happy with how long this mission ended up being, but by the time we got around to really examining it, it was so late in development that we just couldn't do anything about it without fundamentally tearing the mission apart. Because the entire mission is dependent on the timing of the convoy moving between the two gates. This is the first chance players get to interact with our new AI. This is not a very menacing introduction because these fighters are mostly assigned to tangle with the convoy, and while they will react to you dynamically, they don't go all out to try to kill you. We figured we wanted a gentle introduction. And as you can see here, Laporte is taking her first steps as a combat pilot, and we did want to show that. I wish there was a more profound way to do it, but these training messages at least interject a little flavor about her psychology and what she's thinking about. So, I'm just waiting for him to mob up these fighters. The AI is really extensive. We fixed a ton of bugs during development in the AI code itself, and just the ambition of the tables is really impressive. Fury did a great job with these. I would not be able to work on a mod that did not use this AI in the future because it opens up so many new options and it's so much easier to balance with. So, with the first combat sequence done, we're moving into the first lengthy dialogue sequence. And these lengthy dialogue sequences are kind of problematic on a few levels. I like them. I think they're important to the atmosphere and to what Blue Planet is, but one thing we try to keep in mind is, well, we have a rich story. Again, this is a game. And one mod that I really enjoyed, that's gotten a bad rap lately, was the original release of Inferno. And it did have a thin story. It didn't even do as much to develop its story as the free space retail games did, but it allowed you to get engaged. And I think that's what a good story does. It doesn't get in the way of your engagement. And when what you have to do is just fly around with a convoy listening to people talk, the first time through, I suppose the writing can carry you. And I like to think the writing is alright, although I don't think this is our finest moment. So I'm very glad we got to open with Artemis Station instead of straight into this mission. But I do worry, my biggest worry about this campaign in general is just that there is too much dialogue, and that it gets in the way of the player getting immersed in this sort of flow state, where they can really just lose themselves in the game. So that's probably a concern I'll touch on again as we move forward. QD here is checking out the models. The Cadmos there is a freighter. We just needed a civilian ship. It's not a beautiful ship. It's kind of ugly. But our policy with models has always been to just go with what works. The Sanctus Cruiser there is a pretty neat ship. I enjoy fretting with it. It's nearer to the size of a Corvette than a classical cruiser. It's very tough. It doesn't have any beams, but it has a respectable anti-fighter armament. We spent a lot of time, again, also designing the Federation's warships. And we wanted to take a very different approach from the Alliance ones that we're all familiar with, which tend to be powerful against other warships, but very thinly defended against fighters. And the Federation warships are actually pretty comprehensively guarded against fighter attack. It's very hard to kill them with bombers, because their point defenses are so good. And again, Fury did a great job there, making these two unique defense weapons for them, the point defense turret, which fires in these long tracer-like bursts, and the shotgun flak. Both of which you can read about the detector. So here you see the Alliance using Maxim bombers, which is something you never see in retail. We really, again, wanted to play up that these guys are pretty smart. There's only 3 light bombers here. But we don't like throwing vast amounts of forces at the player, because every time you kill a bomber, that's a multi-ton war machine with a really expensive pilot who's also a human being. And no real military can afford to just throw these things away. Now, if we were smarter here, I think we'd have had those Gulas fighters jump in with the bombers. But we didn't want to overwhelm the player too much right here at the start, in case they were having trouble. Although, come to think of it, if I were to remake this mission, that's probably a change I would make. So, as we looked at how to make the GTVA more threatening, in a gameplay sense, rather than just a narrative sense, because that was one of the biggest problems with the alpha. They were just not a credible foe. One of the things we looked at was removing the use of waves. We didn't like waved attacks because having a wing with a wave count makes it look like they're just waiting for their comrades to get killed before they show up to help out. And the question then becomes, if you have these 12 bombers, why don't you send them all in at once instead of 4 at a time? And by and large, we managed to steer clear of the use of waves. There are a couple places where we used them where we thought it made sense, because what we rapidly found is that having 12 bombers on the scene is not any better than having 4 bombers if they don't have enough fighter cover, or if they're coming in from the wrong angle. They're not going to get anything done. So sometimes it makes sense to kind of take a few stabs at it rather than one big thrust. So, the characters. Kasim is your gung-ho comrade. And we never managed to fit in all the depth we wanted with him. I think it comes across that he's very bold at first, but that there's something kind of cracking in the depths. You can tell from his bravado that he's new. He's new to this. He very much wants to be good at it. I have a feeling, well, in fact we know, although I can't reveal all of it, that there's more history to this character. I don't think he was always this way. I imagine something either in his formative years or in the earlier years of this war has changed him and made him this way. Right here, there's a line from Bree about how the enemy is sending their fighters to other locations, which I liked. I like the sense that there's a greater strategic situation that the Alliance is paying attention to, because, it makes them seem smarter. It makes them seem more credible as an opponent. As I mentioned before, this mission is long. We're coming up on the halfway point here, but I have plenty to talk about. One big difference between this story and Age of Aquarius is that your character's not in a command position, and I think that psychologically makes a big impact. Because in this first mission, you're not the one giving the orders, and we worried that there was going to be confusion as to who you actually were as a result. You're not the leader here. You're an ensign. You take orders from your uncle, and you kind of have this rivalry with your wingman, but you're not the kind of leader or the decision maker that Sam was. And that was one of my favorite things about Age of Aquarius, and I could stand to see that come back at some point in the future. But we wanted to show Laporte starting from a very, very basic place. And here I suppose I can reveal one of the great thematic drives behind this campaign, which was to create a narrative and formal inverse of Age of Aquarius. Much the same way Metal Gear Solid 2 was a formal deconstruction of the first Metal Gear Solid. This entire campaign, if you look at it, is a mirror image of the first one. Both in terms of how much difference you make to the narrative, the tone, the arc of the character, where she starts out in this enlightened place, as does her whole society, and kind of reverts to this more primal, savage state as the war takes its toll on her and the people around her. Because it's the only way that she, and by extension her whole culture, can survive. Alright, we are coming up on the end of the mission here, where we're going to see our first checkpoint. We were very excited to get this feature into our first mission after we implemented it in our last combat mission. And the reason we decided to implement it here was because we didn't think this mission was stellar. We didn't like the notion that players would have to play it more than once. Here comes the last attack wave. We were just really averse to the notion that players would, play this mission once, get killed at the end, not want to sit through the whole thing again, and quit or get frustrated. That's a bad experience. So we threw in a checkpoint here. Although I actually missed it if it happened. Trust me, there's a checkpoint in this mission. You can see the swing coming in. I like this touch here. Darius did this with the cruisers maneuvering away from the convoy to interpose themselves. Puts the cruisers at greater risk, but saves some of the civilians, because those civilian ships are very fragile. What was I saying? Checkpoints. So the checkpoint system itself actually broke the engine, because we used too many player persistent variables, so we had to cut down on it. But all that meant is that we just changed some dynamic positional storage to static positional storage, where the ships will be teleported to the same location every time the checkpoint is invoked, instead of dynamically recalling the previous position from the last playthrough of the mission. And that actually cleared up in what we had, where if the player repeatedly, over hundreds of times, used the checkpoint, the ships would gradually creep forward until they broke the mission. So yeah, I'm glad we worked our way around that one. You can see the cruisers engaging with their burst flak there. We wanted that to be a little different than the flak hoses the Alliance ships use. So this attack was interesting. We spent a lot of time balancing it. At one point, right before the checkpoint was implemented, it was suicidally hard. The bombers were bad enough, but the escort consisted of 6 fighters, 3 of which were this new ship, Black Wolf's Draco Interceptor, which I could not handle. Most of our players could not handle. They would just kill testers over and over. People were really frustrated, and we just knew it was a problem when Isurai, I think, got to the end of this mission and could not beat it. And as I mentioned, we just did not want people to be stuck on this mission, listening to our characters talk about first the conduct of the war so far, and then their own psychologies. Which is something I haven't touched on so far, the character arc so far in this mission. Where we wanted to establish that Laporte is kind of this gun-shy soldier, but that she has this unrecognized and kind of eerie aptitude for killing. Which was based on some of our own readings on the psychology of warfare by people like SLA Marshall and David Grossman, who talk about this certain percentage of people who are very, very effective soldiers. And in Free Space, that psychology isn't as applicable because the combat here is very technical. You never see other people face to face. You don't really engage in direct violence so much as this mechanistic interaction between ships and machines. But we felt that for a society like the Federation, which has spent so much time training its citizens to be empathic and humanistic, this would be a valid concern, even in this sort of indirect, inhuman confrontation. So, unsurprisingly, it looks like Quantum Delta has gotten the whole convoy through intact. They jump out. This was a surprisingly complex sequence to Fred, just to account for all the possible different outcomes. I was not lead designer on this mission. I came into it fairly late to design the checkpoints and tweak some gameplay stuff. Darius did most of it, so getting all this stuff working smoothly is quite to his credit. And the gate itself, the gate system, I should talk about that. So, we knew, coming out of Free Space 2 and all the canonical information there, that the Sol system was supposed to have this massive civilian infrastructure, much more so than the rest of the Alliance combined. So we wanted this to show that the system was really, really heavily industrialized. But we didn't get a chance to do that much in our missions. So even before I joined the project, Darius had this concept of the intrasystem gate network, which would be these jump gates connecting all the various parts of Sol, which ships could use to move around cheaply and quickly. They wouldn't have to plot their own jumps, and they wouldn't even have to carry their own subspace drives, which we assumed were expensive to one degree or another. So it creates these sort of arteries of trade and commerce, which really sustain the system. Also, narratively, it's a great excuse for ships to be traveling from point to point, rather than directly by subspace jump. And we in fact thought that it could be even useful to the Alliance if they captured some of the gate network, because they can move ships through it sneakily by just dry firing the gates at regular intervals to make it seem like ship transits had happened. So here go the cruisers. They're jumping out. There's a little bonus dialogue here if you actually lose one of the cruisers, which I don't think we'll get to see here since he didn't lose either. And that's that for this mission. Very short coda, just to return to base. Some of our missions have lengthy codas, which I'll talk about later. And there we go. I don't know if he's going to record the debriefing too. Looks like it. Here's Telfer again. Just wrapping up, saying that things have gone badly at Jupiter. So I want you to see there, in many missions, there is a personal log you can get by hitting recommendations if you succeed in the mission. We thought that feature had been underused in most fan campaigns, so we decided to throw in a little bit of extra narrative there. There are a lot of different narrative aspects to this campaign. Sometimes I think probably too many. Alright. See how much longer he is going to look at this. Got a minute or so. Oh, one thing I didn't notice, I have the sound off while I'm watching these, so I'm not sure if it was apparent, but the Betty was a feature we added very late. It is the voice of Rian, and it's basically just a script that notifies you verbally of various mission-critical status updates about your fighter, like if certain weapons are running low. We like it. We worried people would hate it, but it seems to have worked out. And that's that for that mission.